Hi, this is Paisley,
And this is Dr. Crow.
and today we are sharing our Civ 7 wish list, but from the perspective of the field of history.
Right, so we're going to give some gameplay suggestions as well as content ideas like new civs, leaders, and wonders that we'd like to see.
Right. So let's start with the gameplay ones. They are quite foundational, so I don't think we're going to see any of them.
It's not happening.
No. And the first one is just this idea of what is the civilization. And we've talked about this before, but the dichotomy between civilized and barbarian, we think that can shift a little bit, and we have an idea of how you can do that.
Yeah, our idea is that what you could do is add nomadic civilizations. So maybe they wouldn't found cities or they wouldn't have borders, but they could move around the map. And that would kind of give an interesting new dynamic to the game, as well as actually better reflecting that tension between nomadicism and settled life that is such a motor of history.
Exactly. And there's been a lot of new research, new archaeological sites that have come out since 30 years ago when Civ started. And one of these is Göbekli Tepe.
Right, so this is a site in Inner Anatolia. They found were these enormous megaliths, these stone monuments that were constructed by, it appears, hunter-gatherers, right? And so before that, people assumed you needed settled life or you needed some kind of more structured organization to build these kind of structures. But it turns out that hunter-gatherers were able to do this.
Right. And actually, we haven't been to Göbekli Tepe, but we've been to Çatalhöyük, which is another site, which is a settlement. We're not exactly sure where the line was between settled population and nomadic population. And actually, we see that even up until today, or the 19th century at least, with pastoral nomadicism, right?
Exactly. People weren't just in one category, nomad or settled. People moved in and out of categories. People would, for example, be settled for a period of the year and then would move when the land was exhausted. Or they would, for example, fish for a part of the year or forage for another part of the year.
One of our criticisms of the game is this concept of barbarian. This is an ideological concept. It is a way of discerning who is part of your in-group and who is part of the out-group. And the term barbarian, unfortunately, meant my people, the Persians, for the Greeks, right?
Right.
Because Persians wouldn't speak Greek, so they were like bar, 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 bar. And so this idea of this, like there's these uncivilized groups of people, well, I think that is something that has changed.
For sure. I think no one would ever use the term barbarism or barbarian in a modern history textbook, for sure.
Yes, unless they're talking about the sort of ideology that was purported.
Right. So I think it could be an interesting way of, again, reframing it so it's not just civilization versus barbarians, but actually thinking about settled versus nomad.
Right. And I think the barbarian mode that they added to Civ 6 kind of starts to get at this idea because you can trade with them, you can hire them as mercenaries. And it is true, nomadic populations would often sit on the outskirts of empires, and they would be sometimes brought in, they would be sort of put into positions of government, they would be traded with in order to quell any pillaging and the sort of antagonism between the sort of cities and the barbarian population, the nomadic population.
Right. And I remember in Rise of Nations with the Lakota, they didn't have any borders, so they could build anywhere on the map. They could settle anywhere on the map.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the civs in Civ 6 already represent this kind of nomadicism. The Mongolians, for sure, right, would have tent cities that they could pick up and go. So I think it already is reflected in the civilizations they've chosen, but now it's a matter of how do we take the concept of nomadicism and make it a game mechanic, not the game mechanic.
A game
mechanic. Okay, let's move on to number 2, which is non-human agents. This has become a huge concept in the field of history. I think kind of there's like a pendulum swing. It went into the field of object-oriented
ontology.
Right. And this is sort of in contrast to subjectivity. Do you want to describe those two ends of the spectrum?
Well, I guess one way of thinking about it is one of my professors has a article called Can the Mosquito Speak? We'll actually come back to this later on. The idea being that when you think about history, okay, a mosquito, we kind of picture that as like an obstacle, brings malaria, brings whatever, right? As kind of an endemic thing in nature. But what if you write history from the perspective of the mosquito, right? Like they have their own goals, they have their own ways of living, right? And thinking about them as an actor
Mhm.
in history, not just as a kind of obstacle. That kind of idea has really gone throughout history, I think. That focus on non-human actors, not just things like mosquitoes and animals, but also bacteria, also things like even things like the environment itself.
Right. And I guess in my field, we even look at objects themselves, right? Like, how does a painting shift the way the world is just by virtue of the where the object is in the world and who's looking at it, right? So to give agency to the object that you stare at. Now we don't.
As historians, we're not object-oriented people.
No.
We really like subjectivity, so
But I think it can bring a lot to a game like Civ. And I think they kind of brought that into Civ with the climactic events, right? The
Mhm.
floods and the droughts and the volcanoes. But we have some other ideas.
Yeah, like actually, one of my favorite Civ games, probably my favorite Civ game, is Alpha Centauri, which is the sci-fi Civ game. And in that game, the environment, the planet itself, is an active agent. So it'll expand into your territory. It'll
Mhm.
send dangerous alien life forms into your territory. So it has that kind of active presence. It's a sci-fi game, but I think something like that could be interesting to do in Civ.
Right, like kind of terraforming.
Terraforming, but in a way that, for example, animals move on their own accord,
Yes.
right? Plants expand, deserts expand. You don't have to give it a kind of necessarily like a conscious agency, but it is a kind of agency that has an effect on human societies,
Right,
right?
and the decisions you make in Civ.
Exactly.
And building on top of that, I think disease and famine and disease of animals have made a huge impact on our systems of agriculture, for example. So, including some of those things, locust swarms, malaria,
I
these
mean,
are really,
the
really.
most catastrophic events in history have been pandemics, right? Have been the Black Death, have been the Plague of Justinian, and the Columbian Exchange, right? So these have been the most intensive catastrophic events in human history. And I think adding that to the game would be really interesting. It might not be fun, but
You don't have to take. These are just things we thought
yeah,
about.
you can take them.
And going to our third foundational change we'd like to suggest, which I've titled Can the Civilian Speak? Going back to Can the Mosquito Speak?
Right,
Going back to Can the Subaltern Speak? Which
right.
is a famous article. Do you want to discuss that?
There's a famous article about how historians want to kind of uncover the voices of people who are written out of history, who just maybe have their trace in the historical record but don't have their voice in the record. And Spivak says essentially that you can't do this, right? You're fabulating it, you're creating it as a historian, but there are some things that are just unrecoverable in history. But other people have their own ways of doing it, their own poetics of doing it. And the question is, can we do it in a game, right?
Yeah, and I think the game is probably the best sort of medium to do such a thing, right? Because there's a lot of room for creativity,
Mhm.
but it takes a lot of effort to think about the ways in which the civilization can be viewed from the bottom up instead of the top down, right? So
Mhm.
instead of having your avatar be the ruler, what would it look like if your avatar is just a peasant, a farmer, just a city dweller, a woman, a child, all these sort of categories of people that we don't know much about, but what can we imagine based on everything we do know?
But thinking about civilization is not just a kind of top-down thing, but as a collective effort or a collective group of society, right? I think could be an interesting way of tackling it, for sure. You remember in Roller Coaster Tycoon when you click on the people and they'd be like, "This park sucks, I hate it, like,
Yeah,
get me out of here."
exactly. Okay, let's move on to some more realistic suggestions.
Right.
So this is coming from our perspective as people who study the Middle East region, the Ottoman Empire, bits of Iran.
Mhm.
Who would we like to see in Civ next?
Right. Do you want to do one?
Okay,
Or
sure. I will start because I think this one has never been included in Civ, which is the Mughals.
yeah,
Eh,
of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they are an early modern civilization. They're part of what is called the Gunpowder Empires, and they are in the Afghanistan, northern Indian region. They last, I believe, about 300, 400 years.
Yeah, they last into the 19th century, but by that time their power is a little bit diminished. But I mean, so many amazing works of architecture, art. I mean, it's amazing schools of philosophy and literature. I mean, the Taj Mahal is obviously the most famous building in the world, probably.
Yeah, and Civ 6 has Shah Jahan, one of their rulers, as a great person. I don't remember if he's a great
He's
engineer
engineer, I think.
because he is responsible for the Taj Mahal. It's part of his tomb structure. Yeah, he would be an excellent leader. Also, the founder of the Mughals, Babur, would be really good. Literally any of them. Akbar would be
Akbar,
excellent.
Humayun, yeah. I mean,
Humayun.
even though Humayun, he's not the best,
But still, like, I feel like there's these huge cult of personalities around the first few
for sure, definitely.
rulers. And also, there's a lot of female rulers that had a lot of agency and power, especially through their architectural patronage that we
Mhm.
know of. So there would be a lot of options there too,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Okay, so your turn.
My turn. Okay, well, I'm going to go for the Hittites.
Yes.
They have been in Civ before. They've been in Civ 3, but I think the Hittites are very interesting. I mean, they're the kind of the superpower of the ancient world. Kind of unique civilization. You know, they have this very unique script. They are these competitors of Egypt. We're not so sure. There used to be that they were very much associated with the invention of ironworking. We're not so sure about that now.
Hmm.
But I mean, if you look at the ruins they left in Hattusa, which is in modern day Turkey, I mean, they're amazing ruins.
Yeah, and we actually went to Ankara where a lot of their cultural heritage and objects are collected. The museum there is really wonderful. And I
Mhm.
feel like it's an aesthetic we don't get much of. And it adds a lot, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, my turn. We've already discussed this, the Safavids. It's just a no-brainer to me because yes, we've had ancient Persia in every Civ game. In the last Civ update, they added Nadir Shah, which was excellent to see, but kind of surprising because you're passing over this amazing empire, which is the Safavid Empire in Persia. And they're also an early modern empire, so it's around 1500s. They have two excellent kings, Ismail and Abbas, who would be really great to see as rulers in the game.
Mhm.
And also, we've discussed this before. There's Esfahan is an amazing city that they build, and there's the Maidan, the square in Esfahan that can be a wonderful wonder as well.
Mhm.
That's jumping ahead.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe Kuzulbash for the unique unit.
Yeah, watch our Persia playthrough, and we discussed this.
And then last one, I think I'll give one. Timurids.
Yes. We
Yes.
just mentioned Tamerlane. So the Mughals claim to be descendants of Timur.
Yeah, I think they're pretty sure on that one, but Timur kind of claims to be kind of vaguely
Right.
related to Genghis Khan. And he's technically not, but he marries into the family. So, but the Timurids have this whole period called the Timurid Renaissance when they sponsor incredible works of literature and amazing architecture in Samarkand, which was one of their capitals. You have the Registan, which is a square full of these beautiful buildings. And Timur,
And Timur himself is an excellent leader.
I mean,
who is a great general in Civ 6.
Great general. I mean, that's fair for sure. But I think having him as a leader in the game would be amazing. You cannot talk about anything after the Timurid period in the Islamic world without talking about the Timurid influence, for sure.
Right, including the Ottomans, including the Safavids, and of course, like we mentioned, the Mughals.
Yeah.
Great. So that's it for our empires to include. We have some alternative leaders to civs we've already seen, and we'll start with the Ottomans, which is Hürrem, who is the wife of Suleiman.
Yeah, I think we've had Osman before, we've had Mehmet, but I think having a woman leader would be really great because really, I mean, the Ottomans have these incredibly powerful female rulers, Hürrem, Kösem, Nurbanu, and they really are ruling the empire, right? They sponsor incredible works of architecture and hospitals, mosques, all these sorts of things.
Yeah, a lot of times their power increases when their son who rules is young. So most of the time, the powerful women will be queen mothers. But Hürrem is an interesting one. She gains a lot of power as a consort and then later the first wife ever of an Ottoman ruler. There's a lot of power that went with this new title that has been created just for her. So even though she's ruling at the same time as Suleiman, and she's not exactly a de facto ruler, there's a lot of power that's consolidated around her.
And of course, what made Suleiman a great ruler was the people around him. Hürrem, Ibrahim, Ebu Suud, who was the chief mufti. So all these are like really important figures in Ottoman history. And I think having Hürrem there as that kind of standard bearer, as the first woman to claim that title, would be a really great addition.
Right. The second one is a little bit personal. It's Dr. Crow's middle name, Charlemagne.
Yeah, you don't spread that around too much. But yeah, my middle name is Charlemagne, so I think that'd be cool to have him in the game.
Has he ever been in the game?
He has been in Civ 4, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, he has been in the game. He could be good as like a mixed like French-German ruler, you know? Same way you have Eleanor in Civ 6.
Right. So let's move on to wonders. There's a few we've already mentioned, so I'll just say here, Esfahan Meydan definitely needs to be added. Çatal Höyük could be an interesting one. I think just like archaeological sites in general will be an interesting to add. That's not generic like it is in Civ 6, but like actual sites.
And Göbekli Tepe.
Göbekli Tepe would be great. Of course, the Mughal tombs, any of them would be excellent besides just Taj Mahal, but Babur's tomb, Humayun's tomb, Akbar's tomb. They're all these beautiful sites. And we have one more in South Asia, which is the Qutub Minar, which is this very large, tall minaret, you could say, but it has a layered history of pre-Islamic Hindu religion.
Yeah, incorporates a lot of spolia from different epochs. So it's a very interesting monument for sure.
Yeah, so that should be on their radar. You put this one here. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I thought maybe giving a different Byzantine wonder. Usually we have Hagia Sophia, but I think having San Vitale in Ravenna would be really interesting. That's where the famous mosaics of Justinian are from. And yeah, I think it's a really beautiful site and could add that kind of extra element there.
Yeah, and speaking of mosaics, the Great Mosque of Damascus has beautiful mosaic work. Again, another one, we love sort of layered sites, and the Great Mosque of Damascus was a former church. So you really see that amalgamation of style plus this new mosque architecture coming in from the Muslims.
Also, I don't think the Mezquita of Cordoba has ever been in the game. I think that would be a really interesting wonder too. I mean, that is also a very layered site. You have a cathedral inside a mosque. So it's a very interesting kind of architectural synthesis.
Right. And Ctesiphon, which has never been in the game.
Never been in the game.
This is insane. This is like a must-have in every game.
Yeah. This is the biggest arch of the pre-modern world. I have no idea how they built it. I have no idea how it stands still. I mean, it's kind of...
More or less.
More or less. It was actually pretty much complete until the 19th century and then fell down a bit. But, I mean, it's an amazing architectural site for sure.
Yeah, and it has a lot of reverence throughout the region. A lot of poetry references it, and a lot of times architects will say, my building has surpassed Ctesiphon. Of course it hasn't. It's just this exaggeration, but it's like this poetic motif a lot of the time too.
Right.
Okay,
so those are our suggestions. Take them if you like them.
They're releasing gameplay in 3 days, but take them.
But, work overtime, add it in, add in nomadicism immediately.
But no matter what Civ 7 is, we're going to love it and enjoy it and play it nonstop.
Yeah, for sure. So we're waiting on that gameplay video. And after we watch that, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, bye.